Assalamu alaikum. How do you stay fit as a doctor, as a businessman, as a dad? How is this even possible? I mean, most businessmen, most doctors, most dads, they're working 12 plus hours a day. The idea of having time to work out, to meal prep, to eat healthy, to do anything other than just work, and make your prayers. Boom, it seems impossible to do anything else. Yet, right in front of you is a man who is more shredded than me, even though he is a doctor, even though, mashallah, he's a businessman, and even though he's actually the doctor who I go to when I need advice. This guy is the man, the myth, the legend. I'm really excited. Today, inshallah, if you're watching this, if you're a doctor, if you're a businessman, if you're a dad, by the end of this, you're going to know exactly why, so you have the motivation. You're going to know exactly how, so you have the strategy you can implement right away to start getting some results as far as being fit, no matter what your schedule is, doctor, businessman, dad, whatever you got going on. We're going to solve that today, inshallah. So, jazakallah khair for being here. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be here, Munir. Number one is it's easy to do it when we have mentors like you and people surrounding us. It's easy to do it when we have people like you that we surround ourselves with, because you become pretty much the average of the people you spend the most time with. One thing I like to tell doctors and businessmen and working professionals is you really just got to keep it simple. Just don't overcomplicate it. And that goes from everything from nutrition to diet to working out to your daily routine. Really don't overcomplicate it. Keep your options limited. That way you don't really have to think about too much. Like, for instance, I try my best to work out first thing in the morning because after work you're a little bit too tired and your hormones are already primed in the morning to work out in the morning. So those are a couple of things that I've done throughout the years. But I was thinking about this the other day, and while I was working out, I was thinking, okay, what's some advice that I can give to medical students or college students or young Muslim professionals or whoever? And one of the things that I thought about is if you're like 18 to 25 years old, like what's one of the best investments you can make in yourself? Like you see all these videos, right? Like drop shipping, do this, do that, try this next come up, this is going to make you rich quick, etc., etc. What I thought about is like the best investment you can make is to build a body. Like that's the best investment you can make because it's much easier to build those habits and get in shape when you're 18 to 25 as opposed to waiting till you're later. Not saying that it's hard to do it when you're later, but it's a lot easier to maintain. And that goes the same if you're 25, 35. When you build it then, it's much easier to maintain when you're 35 to 45. So my best advice is just start. You don't have to be an expert.
Those are some amazing points, mashallah. Yeah, I mean, keeping it simple. I think everybody wants to overcomplicate it because everybody wants the most optimal scientific strategy. Listen to all the Huberman podcasts and all these other people who are giving you all these, scientifically sound things. But the one thing that we're forgetting is the science of psychology. And the science of psychology is if it's too complicated, it's way too hard to execute, especially if you're already overwhelmed with everything else. So let's keep it really, really simple. And we're going to go into the strategies today. But the first thing I want to go into is there's a lot of doctors out there and a lot of businessmen out there and a lot of dads out there, and especially if you're all three, who are struggling with the motivation side of things. They're like, man, I'm so tired at the end of a long day. And you've already given them the solution, actually, which is work out in the morning. But maybe they're like, oh, but it's hard to wake up. My sleep quality sucks. I'm on a CPAP machine because I'm obese. Or maybe your sleep quality is just suffering. You're not working out. Oh, sleep is harder as you get older. Oh, my kids are waking up in the middle of the night. There's a lot of objections people have to working out in the morning. But I think it all comes down to a motivational issue and a prioritization issue. So why should fitness be a priority? You talked about investing in it from a young age to build that, when you're young. But let's say there's a 45-year-old doctor or even a 35-year-old doctor who's trying to find the motivation to prioritize this, but it's just hard for him to make this a priority.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And, I think we all struggle with that at some point. I don't think me and you have it completely figured out. I mean, honestly, it's something that is a constant work in progress. So, do I have the magic bullet? No, but however, I think the first thing people need to do is create a different neuro association in their brain. And I think that's what I've done that's helped me so much. So, for instance, most people associate working out, eating healthy to pain. Like, oh, that's painful. That is not going to give me pleasure. But what I've done is I've associated working out and eating healthy to positive neuroassociations. For instance, for me, I have to take care of all my tasks and then I reward myself with the workout. So for me, working out is actually a reward. It's like, okay, you've completed X, Y, and Z. You now can work out. And so because I've changed that neuroassociation, it's a lot easier for me to work out because it's not a painful experience in my brain. In my brain, it's become a reward system. And I think that takes time to rewire, but having that thought will help a lot because then you're no longer relying on motivation because it's actually a reward for you. The other thing is what people don't understand is the best thing you can invest in is your health. So I'm an interventional pain physician. I also do anesthesiology on the side, but I mainly do injections to help people. So, anywhere from PRP, and these are like stem cells that we get from your own body. And I do stem cell, and I do these injections all over the body, mainly in the spine and the neck and the joints. And some people believe that they can just take a medication or they can just do a surgery and everything will be solved. And that might happen sometimes. But for me, I like to think about year 2, year 3, year 4. So when I treat my patients, I put them on a program where their body is primed for healing. And so that's what you want to do. You want to start thinking about how you want to heal your body because all of these bad habits, Munir, they're going to affect you from head to toe. And I like to talk about the systems it affects. So sometimes you got to tell people like, hey, you're going to be at higher risk for Alzheimer's. Hey, if you're diabetic, you're going to develop glaucoma. Hey, if you're diabetic, you're going to start getting coronary artery disease a lot faster. Hey, if you're hypertensive, your heart is going to start thickening and your coronaries are going to have to cross that thicker layer of muscle to send more blood, putting you prone to heart attacks, arrhythmias, etc. Maybe a pacemaker. Hey, you're diabetic, you're obese, your liver is going to be stained with all kinds of fat and it's not going to detox you. That's going to cause problems over time. Hey, you want your diabetes to be rampant? Your kidney's not going to filter, etc., etc. So there's a whole system-based process that is affected based off of those choices you make. And you just have to create a neuro association that working out is pleasure, it's a reward, and not a painful experience. And that's what I've done.
SubhanAllah. I love how you broke that down. I like how you tied it back all together with the whole neuro association because I think right now people are focused on the short term. Oh, it's going to hurt in the short term, and in the long term, maybe I'll get some benefit. But you also have to look at the negative neuroassociation with the long term of not working out. All the things you mentioned about heart health, the liver, detox of the body, potential risk of glaucoma, and a lot of my audience is prone to diabetes. So there's a lot of different things to tie in there. There's really 3 big points you went into there. First off, on tying in like the positive association, I actually have a story from one of the many doctors, alhamdulillah, who we've been able to help with this, which is one brother who he started 2 years ago on our program, and the first like 3 to 6 months he was really struggling with consistency because he just had an overwhelming schedule. He had a young child just born, everything, so he was really struggling. Now the funny thing is, mashallah, he just had his second child, but he's not having any consistency issues at all. Why? Because he's built that positive association with working out. This past Ramadan, he was working out after suhoor. Like, even I don't work out after suhoor because I get dehydrated. Yes, subhanAllah, this guy was working out 5 days a week. I was only having to do 3 to 4. He did extra workouts because he loved the energy levels that he gained from working out. And he's 42. He's in his early 40s, yet for him, it's not like, oh, I'm tired, I'm old. It's like, hey, man, this makes me feel young. This is great. And now that he had his second child, I was talking to him like 2 weeks after his kid was born. And he's like, yeah, I'm back in the gym 3 days a week, whenever I find time because I just love the energy it gives me. I'm eating as healthy as I can because I love the energy it gives me. So there's that positive association versus the negative association when you're tired, you're triggered, you have heart disease, you're worried about the fact you could have a heart attack any day, especially if one of your family members had it at this age too and your friends are dropping like flies around you. Now, another big thing, the health aspect of things, you tied into some excellent points there. There's also the personal image side of things, because you mentioned that with what you do, part-time in anesthesiology, but mostly with your interventional pain specialist, imagine if you were 270 pounds and your patients walked in, you're like, yeah, I'm going to help you get healthy. I'm going to teach you this protocol. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you with your pain, even though my knees hurt because I'm so heavy. What do you think about doctors who don't live the part? Because part of why I trust you for advice is you live the part. You're shredded, mashallah. You're jacked, and doctors don't have to be as jacked as you per se, but they definitely shouldn't be obese. So what are your thoughts on the personal image side of things as well?
Well, I think you need to take some credit for me being in shape because I've talked to you many times and you've helped me out a lot. I mean, I've been working out for a long time. You've gave me brilliant advice. So to anyone who does come to you, they're going to get good results. And I think that's the thing is most doctors, they become complacent. Okay, they become complacent and they're just okay where they're at. And most doctors actually, I didn't even think about this until right now. Most doctors, okay, let me rephrase this. Doctors are the worst patients. That's why. If you tell a doctor to do something, they're not going to do it. Like doctors are the worst patients because they always think of the worst case scenarios. So it's very hard to treat them. And so I think sometimes that plays a role, but what plays more of a role is the habits doctors develop, especially during training, during medical school, right? So during med school, bro, it's like drinking water from a fire hydrant or from a waterfall. Like that's how much you have to read every day. I remember I literally would study from 6 a.m. to like 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. every single day. And some people didn't need to study that much. Some people studied more. I felt like I was just average. And and when you're studying for that long, there's so many bad habits you develop. Like you're sitting for a long time, which is actually terrible for your spine, especially for your discs. You're sitting for a long time and messes up your posture. You become lazy like by default because you're sitting for so long, and you don't really want to make the extra effort to get healthy food because you don't want to miss out on studying. So a lot of times what happens is you develop all these bad habits in med school and it starts snowballing more and more. Starts snowballing in residency, where now your time is dictated by your training program and you really don't have a say in when you can and can't work. That is all dictated by your training program. So these bad habits develop more and more and more. And so a lot of these habits over time, they just become characteristics of these doctors without them knowing. And subconsciously, they go about their day not knowing that what they're doing is wrong. And then they start developing visceral fat, they start developing a belly, they start developing issues, their arthritis gets worse. And they start getting steroid injections for their knees or their joints, which by the way we can have a whole other discussion about that because that's not good for your cartilage, but that's a little tangent there. But what I'm saying is doctors by default develop these bad habits over time and they don't even know until it's too late, until they go get some lab work. And that's if they get lab work, because remember I told you they're the worst patients. So they're not even going to get lab work. They're going to assume that everything is okay. And I think that's the biggest problem is they've developed these bad habits for so many years that now it's just a part of their character and they don't even realize it.
Absolutely. And it's crazy how unsupportive the entire healthcare industry, as far as how most hospitals are set up, how unsupportive they are of the actual health of everybody who works for them. Like not just the doctors, the nurses, everybody who works at a hospital. Like at least some workplaces, like for instance, let's say you have somebody who works at, a company where he's doing programming or engineering or something, at least the cafeteria usually has some healthy options. And some hospitals have healthy options. But one frustration I've had is so many doctors we worked with, they're living in a place where people are supposed to come for health and it's to solve health problems. But what if we could prevent those health problems by actually just eating healthy food, which is the real root cause of a lot of these things? And so you go to these cafeterias and there's sweets and there's, bagels and croissants and desserts and all this stuff and these oily, foods and seed oils and whatnot. And that's another discussion as well, which we've had. And we've had some other doctors try to debate us on that on Instagram, but, we'll get into that later. But the point is, and the same doctor I was telling you about, by the way, the one who, mashallah, now he's very consistent. We have a lot of doctors who, mashallah, are very now consistent as a result of this positive feedback loop, and some who are in those initial stages just building it. But that one doctor in particular, who I've been working with for a very long time, mashallah, he was telling me that one big struggle that he had in the beginning with his nutrition was you're a doctor and you're pouring into other people all day, right? You're giving from yourself, and at the end of the day, you feel depleted and you want to treat yourself. And I've had the same conversation with so many of our clients, both doctors and non-doctors, but especially doctors, because you have to have a certain persona, because as a doctor, you're not just going in and saying, boom, just do the work, programming, whatever, just type on a computer, no emotions. No, you're not just pouring your logic into solving their problems, but you're pouring your emotions into, giving them that reassurance. So it can be very draining, especially if you're unhealthy and you don't have a good reservoir of energy to pull from, because you're waking up burnt out, you're not working out in the morning, you're not taking care of yourself, your nutrition is poor, everything. So really the habits that doctors compound is part of why somebody who works in healthcare can have such poor health and be so obese, is because of just that snowball of terrible effects. SubhanAllah.
Yeah, and that's brilliant what you mentioned because God, I actually mentioned that the other day to one of my medical assistants. We had a patient come in and they were coming in for chronic pain, but they really wanted to focus on some weight loss strategies too, which I do as well. And when they came in, I gave them a whole comprehensive plan, and they're like, "Oh, I tried this, I tried that, I tried this," and they're pretty much telling me that they've tried everything. So I was like frustrated for them because I was like, well, you haven't, you've either tried everything, but you've done it wrong because this is get like I guarantee you, if you follow XYZ, you are going to lose weight without medications, without surgery, without any sort of interventional procedures like that. If you do what I'm telling you, then you're going to lose weight. So I think a lot of times is patients have this expectation and you have to give forth your energy like you said, and it can be draining, absolutely. And I told my MA that day, I'm like, gosh, I was drained after that visit. Yeah, it was like a 30-40 minute visit, but I was drained because everything I was telling the patient, it was like one ear out the other, like, oh, I've already done that. Well, you haven't done that because you're not getting the results you want. So let's polish up what you've been doing. So I completely agree with that. And doctors again are some of the worst patients. And I hate to say this too, but sometimes doctors develop elitist mentalities where they're like, well, I know everything, or I didn't learn that in med school, so it can't be right. And I think that's wrong because when I took my oath and when you take your oath in medical school, part of it is understanding that you are always learning. There's always something to learn. Science is always advancing. So what we might know may change later on, and you have to adapt to it. And I think that's part of the other reasons why some doctors find it harder to take initiative. But at the end of the day, we're examples for our patients, so we don't have an excuse.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's a really good point that you bring up. And I think that ties into with like being a successful businessman. Like as a doctor, you have to have a growth mindset, just like how as a businessman, you have to have a growth mindset, just like how as a Muslim, as a father, as a human being who wants to be maximally successful, you have to have a growth mindset because you're going to have to adapt with the times and with different things that you're going to need to adjust to get better results for yourself and the people around you who depend on you to be your best. And so it's so interesting. I was actually having a conversation with a new client who we just took on. He's a doctor, mashallah, and he's a GI specialist, right? And so it was interesting because when I was walking him through his meal plan, I forgot that he was a GI specialist. So I was talking to him about like some gut health stuff. And then he was like, oh, I like this low FODMAPs. And I was like, oh yeah, you've heard of this. Have you tried something like this before? And he's like, no, I'm a GI specialist. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that from the consultation. And then I got a little self-conscious. I was like, okay, well you probably know more about this than I do. But instead of getting all elitist like some doctors do, where it's like, oh yeah, I know everything because I went to medical school, 10, 20 years ago, instead he was like, no, there's a lot I can learn from you too. So he had that humble, learner's mindset. And I can already just tell from his energy that he's going to be a very good client, mashallah. And I've also had some more stubborn doctors, but alhamdulillah, there are a lot of really good, open-minded doctors out there. I think the thing that is the most challenging about working with doctors, at least from my perspective as a fitness and weight loss coach, is more so just the fact that their sheer schedules and demands are just so crazy. They can be very challenging. Like I remember the first time I worked with, my first handful of doctors, there were some guys who were telling me, oh, I have this 26-hour shift. I'm like, what? That can't be right. 26 hours? Like, what is that? And another guy's like, oh, 32-hour shift. I'm like, bro, are you guys just like making excuses or is this for real? And it turns out it was real. I was like, subhanAllah. So let's go into some of the strategies. We could tie back into the motivation unless you want to tie back any motivational points. But what are some good strategies that doctors can apply during some of these crazy situations, like being on call or other crazy situations that doctors encounter like that, or temptations in the cafeteria, whatever it may be?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's actually funny. There's so many times that I want to record the food in the doctor's lounge. Like almost every day, I want to bring the camera out and just like put the doctor's lounge on blast because there's like candy bars, there's cookies, there's cakes, but it's really hard to find like fruit or something fresh. Anyway, I digress. When it comes to strategies, I think you have to take it case by case. You have to take it case by case because some doctor schedules are a lot different than others. Like that guy who's on call, you have to be a little bit creative for him. I think keeping it simple though, and adapting to what that person can do. For instance, if that doctor is on call, what I would recommend for them is okay, do your call, take the rest day afterwards, and as soon as you wake up from your call, you should work out. Why? Because that's going to change your mood. And you don't have to do anything extreme. For instance, sometimes doctors, businessmen, they might find it hard to go work out. So buying a jump rope, if their knees are, okay, then they can jump rope at home. That's something simple. Buying a pull-up bar at home. That's something I do. Like for instance, if I can't go work out, I'll bust out 100 pull-ups. I have some dumbbells here, and I'll mess around with them, and I have a kettlebell, and I'll mess around for like 45 minutes, an hour, and I get a great workout. Am I being like Phil Heath and going to the gym and setting new PRs? Like, no, I'm not doing that. But at the very least, I'm maintaining and actually maybe making some gains. So I think mixing it up for the doctor depending on their schedule. Oh, okay, you're on call those 2 days. All right, we'll do a home workout so you don't have to worry about driving to the gym, going to the gym and wasting time commuting. Instead, that day we'll keep it light. You'll do 20 minutes of jump rope and then you can do some pull-ups or some push-ups, and I would do some calisthenics too.
Yes.
That's
Oh,
what
and
I do.
I'll
Go
add one
ahead.
thing. I'll add one thing. By the way, just for the because I know there's a lot of 270-pound doctors listening to this too. Definitely don't be jump roping at 270 pounds. And I know that because you're talking like yeah, just do 100 pull-ups, just do 20 minutes of jump rope. I mean, even I'm like, man, 20 minutes of jump rope. No. But the point is, okay. So obviously, so this is the strategy that works for Mustafa. Mustafa, mashallah, has been very successful at this, being a fit doctor for a while. But like, you can go for a walk after your call. And what I love what you said there,
Brilliant.
which is, don't let not feeling like it stop you from working out. It reminds me of a really great quote I heard, which is, it's not about how you feel, it's about how you're going to feel after you do the thing you need to do, right? So even if you
Brilliant.
don't feel like going for a walk, or for the doctors who can jump rope, right? Even if you don't feel like jump rope or whatever it might be, you're going to feel so good after you do it. I love that point about like changing your state by doing that. And then, yeah, likewise, and it's funny because you mentioned like the bodyweight workouts. I have some doctors who can only do bodyweight workouts because they're so busy. Like I have this other brother, mashallah, just built his practice and mashallah saw success very quickly, but he's working 12-hour days, man. Like, even his
Yeah.
wife is complaining that he doesn't have enough time for her. And then on top of that, he doesn't even have kids yet. So I'm like, man, we need to get this down before you have kids. And so for him, I was like, so we were trying to do these gym workouts because he has a gym in his apartment complex, but even the walk to the gym creates enough resistance for him that it's been a challenge. So literally just bodyweight workouts in the morning 3 times a week has been the cure for him. But anyways, sorry, I just wanted to make sure I interjected there before all these 270-pound brothers are hopping off this video like, these guys don't understand me. No, we understand you too. So just wanted to add that. But sorry, keep going.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, so you're right. That's what's worked for me. But I think what'll work for some other people is developing simple habits. For instance, after you eat, just go take a walk. Like even at the hospital. Actually, this is what I do when I'm working at the hospital if I'm doing anesthesia. I will keep it low carb while I'm at the hospital. And then at night I'll have some carbs after my workout. I'll backload some carbs. It works well for me. I found that works really well because number one, when I'm at the hospital, I'm a little bit busier and it's easier for me to not eat while I'm there. And it's easier for me to limit what it is that I am eating when I get the chance to eat. For me, it's easy to incorporate my low carb days. um, at the hospital because number one, there aren't that many options there. First of all, and second of all, is I'm a little bit busier, so I don't have time to sit down and have like a big meal. So what I've done that works for me is usually if I'm in the hospital or clinic, I will either bring food or I'll eat something there that is low carb because what I've noticed is if I have a low carb meal while I'm working, I don't really get that crash afterwards. Now, I'm not saying that you need to have a low carb meal and you're going to have a crash if you have a high carb meal. Everyone's built different. But for me, at least, it keeps that mental acuity going, which I need during clinic, during procedures, when I'm doing injections for people, I need that mental acuity. So I reserve my carbs the days that I'm working till later in the day, or I reserve, the higher carb days for the weekend. And so that way throughout the week, I might be in more of a deficit, and then I can make up for it on the weekend. And for me, that's worked really well. So throughout the week, I'll mainly do low carb. Then Saturday, Sunday, I'll do higher carb, and maybe sprinkled out throughout the week. If I've done an intense workout, like if I've done a boxing workout, I'll have a bunch of carbs afterwards.
And I really like that approach, the carb cycling approach. And I want to dive into the nuances on that because for anybody who watches my channel regularly, you will have seen that I talk about being a big proponent of having more carbs into your diet. So I want to break down a couple nuances there, right? So when you're at the hospital, any carbs that you're going to find are usually going to be simple carbs, and they're usually going to be coupled with a lot of fat. So let's say that you find some basmati rice at the hospital. You're like, okay, cool. This is a low GI carb. This normally works with my meal plan, but the problem is it's got a lot of oil in it. Usually seed oils. The calories are going to be high. The total caloric load is going to make you get into a food coma, and you're going to crash and everything else, right? Versus if you're at the cafeteria and you see a nice piece of salmon and you have that with some salad, you're going to have very consistent energy levels on that. And another caveat too, like when Mustafa says low carb, that doesn't mean that he's just eating, an avocado or something like that. No, he's having protein with that.
Yeah.
Protein is so key
Yep.
for your energy levels.
100%.
So this is another important nuance there because I know some of you might already be low carb. You're like, yeah, low carb. I ate a cauliflower slice of pizza. Why do I not have energy during my shift? What's this guy Mustafa talking about? And it's like, no, just because you had a cauliflower pizza that was low carb, that's not healthy. Then you're fasting all day and you're metabolically unhealthy right now. Like another big thing is a lot of doctors, they'll fast all day because they're too busy to eat, right? But the problem is that if your metabolism is slow and you're 270 pounds, even though you're like not eating all day, you obviously don't have a healthy metabolism. Versus if Mustafa does an intermittent fast and he's getting a little bit of protein throughout that, or even if he does a sunnah fast or whatever else, he's metabolically healthy. So his body is able to switch into fat burning mode and burn fat during that. Versus your metabolism just suppresses itself. So you're running on cortisol all day. You eat in the evening, you crash, your energy levels just plummet. And so it's important that you understand that it's important to get that protein in throughout the day if you're going to do a low carb day. But one other point that Mustafa brought up is he'll usually bring food. That's another important thing because if there's no suitable options in your environment, what can you do? You could just meal prep, right? And so that's the best thing. Now, obviously, I understand that if you're going to go eat at your in-laws' house, you can't exactly bring a meal prep. So that's a good scenario where you can do the low carb, just grab some, chicken drumsticks or some curry or something with chicken in it and avoid the carbs there. And that way your calories are not too high because you're avoiding the carbs. You don't crash and you're getting your protein in so you can accomplish that target. Let's say it's a day that you forgot to meal prep or you didn't have time to meal prep. You can grab a piece of salmon from the cafeteria or some low carb, higher protein option. You should always have some protein, even just a protein bar you can bring with you to work so that if you become stranded, there's no salmon, there's only chicken, and you're strictly the biha, then, inshallah, you can obviously do like the protein bar. So there's a lot of different nuances and strategies you can do there, but I find that the best thing that works for our doctor clients is meal prepping. So Mustafa is proof, right? Boom, bring your own food. If you meal prep something that's got some good complex carbs, right? That way you don't crash. Obviously, if you meal prep, but there's like, gulab jamun or, kanafa or something in your meal prep, it's not really meal prep. That's more so just dessert, right? Your leftover desserts. But if you have some nice basmati rice or some sweet potato, lower on the fats because you're getting those complex carbs, and you can get that in, or you could do like a lower carb approach. There's multiple different ways to do it, but just wanted to add those additional specifics so that no doctors end up eating a cauliflower pizza and wondering why they're not getting results.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the patients that I see are high profile. I have some professional athletes that I see, and they really want to optimize their health. And so we get down in the lab work. I mean, we get pretty deep in the lab work, and most doctors will just scratch the surface with lab work. But if you really want to see why someone isn't losing weight, then you really have to see what their insulin resistance is like. And there's specific labs that you have to look for, not just an A1C. A1C looks 90 days backwards. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is for your doctor clients is most of them just look at the lab work very, very superficially, but you need to get deep in the lab work to really see what is causing their insulin resistance. Because if someone is insulin resistant, then you really have to be aggressive with your weight loss strategies. And a lot of doctors develop insulin resistance with all the bad habits that we talked about. And there's several strategies to go about that. I think, in my opinion, for what's worked for me is a low carb diet for some of these providers and some of these businessmen and these professional athletes that are really trying to get to the next stage with some carb cycling. But I think if you are really struggling to lose weight, and if you are on the bigger end of your BMI, then fasting is very powerful. And I don't know if we share the same opinion, but the reason why fasting is very powerful is because it helps reverse the insulin resistance. However, I don't recommend that you fast for 6 months straight or like 3 months straight. You might have to fast for 3 months straight, but you have to talk to your provider and find out what the strategy is, because doing an aggressive fasting regimen can help reverse that insulin resistance, especially if you are on the heavier side. And it may work to your benefit because you are fixing that insulin resistance, and in the long run, it's going to help you lose that weight and keep it off. Now, for someone like me, like I can't fast every day because my metabolism will slow down, and it has happened to me before. But for someone who is very insulin resistant, you will have to do an aggressive fasting protocol, and I mean pretty aggressive, to get their insulin resistance in check. And a lot of people don't understand that, but we can maybe talk about the science about it in another podcast. But there's different strategies we can go about, and each one is unique to every single patient, whether they're a doctor who's overweight or a businessman who's overweight. And the other thing is having objective results really helps doctors sometimes. Doctors want to see objective results. So, in our clinic, we go deep into the lab work and we show them, hey, at 3 months you were here, and then at 3 months you were here. And I think doctors really like seeing that. They like seeing those numbers change. And even I like seeing that, because to me, I learned all about that in med school. And we don't just scratch the surface. I mean, you have to get deep in there to really analyze the insulin resistance that could be driving that obesity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I agree with you that it's a very case by case basis, because there are some people who fasting is going to be very beneficial for them. And there are some people that fasting is going to be very detrimental for you. And so, like Dr. Mustafa said, talk to, a specialist. So what I can do is, obviously I'll attach the link to my coaching below. And what I'll also do is I'll attach the link to Dr. Mustafa, his Instagram, his YouTube, everything below as well. And you can contact either of us directly if you want to ask some personal questions, because I think it is very important to get personalized advice. Like, don't just watch a bunch of videos on YouTube about fasting and then start blindly following some protocol, because it might work and it might damage you, right? Talk to an expert, and this is very important.
100%.
What I have found on the topic of fasting is that some people, they'll start fasting and they'll lose like 50 pounds in 4 to 6 months, right? And they'll get crazy good results on it. Other people will fast and they'll just notice that their energy levels go down. They start binge eating at night. They feel tired all day. They feel a heightened sense of stress. Their bloating gets worse, a bunch of other stuff. So it depends. If you're somebody who, whenever you fast, you lose a good amount of weight, you lose weight every Ramadan, then definitely you're a high chance that fasting is going to work really well for you, versus if you're somebody who every Ramadan you actually gain weight even though you're fasting all day, you're probably the type of person who fasting makes you more prone to binge eating and more prone to your metabolism slowing down. But again, it's always a case-by-case basis. That's the first diagnostic question I ask, but there's a lot of other diagnostic questions that need to be asked. So that's why you should talk to an expert instead of wasting your time watching a bunch of YouTube videos and trying a bunch of stuff that doesn't work. Because if you're a doctor, you got the money to hire an expert instead of just wasting your time, but you definitely don't have the time to go waste and do the wrong thing and potentially damage yourself in the process. So I'll attach those links below. But anything else you want to add on that, Mustafa?
Yeah, I think what you said is brilliant. I mean, again, it's a case by case basis. And the problem is with conventional medicine, it's just like a blanket statement that should that should apply to everyone, you know, and it's not like that. I like to, you know, Peter Attia is someone I really like. He practices medicine 3.0, and that's what I practice too. And so that's why when I talk about lab work, like I'm not just scratching the surface with hemoglobin A1C. I mean, we get pretty deep and we look at inflammatory markers. We look at a lot of things because it's a whole system-based approach that we do. The other thing is most people who are doing diet changes or fasting, there's some things that there's some things that can make everyone tired. And that's like being dehydrated chronically. And I've talked about this so much on my Instagram is people wake up first thing in the morning and they just can't wait to drink coffee. Like literally, they wake up, they roll out of bed, and they drink their coffee. That's like the absolute wrong thing to do. And the reason why is because coffee blocks a hormone called ADH. And I've talked about this 100 times. I'm talking about 101 times now. And ADH is responsible for you reabsorbing water. Now, if you've had coffee first thing in the morning, that caffeine is going to block that ADH. So any water that you're going to reabsorb, you are now going to just pee out. And so you're not just peeing out water, you're also peeing out salts because that's going to follow the water. And so if you're drinking coffee first thing in the morning, sure, you might have a little bit of energy until noon or for 4 hours for the half life of that caffeine, but then you're going to crash. And you keep crashing because you are just chronically dehydrated. And I've discussed this with so many people that what you should dedicate your morning to, especially if you're an athlete, especially if you're a doctor, especially if you're a businessman, is to hydrating. And you should hydrate with water and some sort of electrolytes and hold off on your caffeine intake for an hour or two. And there's a lot of people that will agree with me, but it just makes sense because you want to build up that tank. You want to fill that tank before you start diuresing with caffeine, with your caffeine source, whether it be coffee or tea. And I guarantee you, if you do that, half the time when I do that, I don't even have caffeine. I won't even have any caffeine for an hour or two. Now, today I had some caffeine, but if you know, and one way to do this for the doctors and the businessmen is I'm not telling you to like sit down for an hour and just drink. No. What I do is I normally will put a bottle of water and I'll put my electrolytes in that bottle of water, about a liter or so, first thing in the morning. And then on my way to work, I'll sip on it. And throughout the morning, I'll sip on it. And by the time I get to work, I already have a liter in me. And then I can have my caffeine if I really need it. And I guarantee you, you're going to feel a lot better. So people oftentimes will blame their fatigue and not feeling motivated based off of they blame it on other things, but it could simply just be dehydration. And I think most people are chronically dehydrated, Munir.
That's a huge point. And I'd love to go into some more energy and hydration tips, like we did actually on our very first podcast as well. So we'll go into more of those today. But it's funny that right before we started the podcast, we were even just talking about this. I was like, yeah, there's something about waiting an hour or two before you have your caffeine and get some sunlight first that makes it hit so much better. You're like, hey, don't say anything cool before we start the podcast. It's so true, though. It really makes a difference. And subhanAllah, it's such an amazing tip. And hydration is such a key. Funny story. One of my employees, one of my assistant coaches, one time he came to visit, right? And when we were having one of our retreats about a year ago, and he had taken like a flight. He got really dehydrated on the flight. He came. He's like, oh, I barely got any sleep. I'm tired. I was like, no problem. Take a nap. We're not in a rush. The retreat doesn't start for a couple hours. So he takes a nap. He wakes up. He's like, oh, I'm so tired, blah, blah, blah. And I just had this instinct. I was like, you know what? Take these electrolytes. And he drank it. And he was like, subhanAllah, I have so much energy. Send me the link to this. I need this. And he was like so excited. He didn't even need any caffeine because a lot of the times we think that we're tired because we didn't have enough caffeine. We didn't have enough sleep. And you definitely need to get enough sleep. Don't get me wrong. That's the number one energy hack is be hydrated and get enough sleep. Don't rely on caffeine and get 4 hours of sleep and not drink any water and wonder why you're struggling. But yeah, it's subhanAllah, it makes such a difference when you time that caffeine so you don't dehydrate yourself. So we can talk. I think talking about energy is really important because the more energy you have, the more motivated you're going to feel. So that's why getting those foundations of hydration and sleep as best you can is going to be very key. There's a number of different strategies here that we can implement. And it actually ties in with the point that I wanted to go into before, which is, you mentioned the carb cycling, and you mentioned that there are some days where you have higher carbs and there are some days where you have lower carbs. And I think an interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize is that, carbohydrates actually make you retain water, which is, which could be bad if you're eating an excess of carbohydrates and you also have inflammation, you're getting a lot of bloating and all that stuff. But also, if somebody is going to try out some of the low carb and potentially the fasting protocols as well, I think it's important that they also understand, how you need to adjust that to make sure that you're staying hydrated as well. So maybe that's an energy point we can go into. We can go into some points about sleep. We can go into points about how when you have more energy, you burn more calories and helps you lose fat. But what do you what would you like to go into, and what do you feel would be the most valuable for? We can go into all those too, but I'll kind of leave it open to you. Anything you want to go into, inshallah.
Oh gosh, those are all good points. It's like you served me a silver platter here, and I have to pick from all these gold bars.
You can
That
pick.
wasn't a good analogy.
No, it's a perfect analogy. But you can pick all of them. But which one do you want to go into first?
Let's do sleep because that was the last one you said and the only one I remember.
Yes.
Uh, okay. Yeah, I think doctors notoriously have terrible sleep. I mean, when I was in residency, I was doing call and anesthesiology. When I was doing my anesthesiology residency, I was doing call all the time. And what that means is you're at the hospital for 24, sometimes I was there for 28 hours, and you're just taking care of the patients that need surgery. Now, in interventional pain, I don't take call, but for the doctors who do take call, I think you only know how it feels when you experience it. That's the best way I could describe it because it's like your circadian rhythm just gets chopped off in the middle of the week and then you have to build it back. But one thing that has always helped me is if I'm on call for the doctors that you help, even the doctors I help, is I tell them your post-call day, make sure that you work out the day after you're on call and the day before your call starts, make sure you work out and that way, your routine isn't completely messed up. Because the worst thing that can happen is you take call, then you're post call, now you're too tired, and you don't want to work out. So I either recommend them doing one of two things: work out before your call or right after your call. And that way, they don't mess up that momentum. But when it comes to sleep, on the days that people are sleeping normally, people need to sleep in a completely black room. Don't eat for 2, 3 hours before you sleep, especially if you wake up to pee a lot. And if you're waking up to pee a lot more than twice every night, then there's some other issue going on in your body, whether it be your blood sugar or your prostate. There's some other issue going on. Even overtraining can cause that too. Um, so when it comes to sleep, people don't understand that you need to sleep adequately and you need to have high quality sleep in order to get your gains. And there's a lot of videos about this online, but the most important thing is sleep hygiene. So when it comes to sleep hygiene, is your space dedicated to sleep? Like, do you sit on your laptop when you're going to sleep, or do you sit on your bed throughout the day and work on your bed, on your laptop, on your business? You should not be doing that. Your sleep space should be just dedicated for sleep. And this might be a very simple concept, but a lot of people will watch TV on their bed. They'll be on their phones on their bed. They'll work on their business on their bed. Your bed should be dedicated to one of two things: sleep or fill in the blank. Okay? The second thing is the room has to be very dark. All right? And the reason why is that helps you sleep and it gets you into deeper sleep throughout the night. So tell all your clients to get some blackout curtains. Every patient that comes to me for weight loss or optimizing their health, even especially the athletes, I tell them first thing you need to do is buy some blackout curtains, buy a blackout mask with the curtains, and make sure that you're sleeping in a very cool temperature, 67 degrees, 69 degrees. If your spouse doesn't like it, you just get them an extra blanket. um, and so there if you're not sleeping right, the gains just aren't going to come, and it's going to have a domino effect on everything else. And and systemically, I always like to talk about the systemic effects. If you're not sleeping, it's going to cause It's going to cause more irritability. It's going to cause depression. It's going to cause anxiety. With regards to your heart, people are higher at risks of heart attack, arrhythmias if they're not sleeping and they're chronically deprived of sleep. It's also going to mess with your blood sugars, which can cause all the cascade of events we talked about in your liver and your kidneys, et cetera, et cetera.
SubhanAllah, it's so true. Even your digestion gets affected if you don't sleep enough. And then if you have bad digestion, that further affects your sleep, which is why, you recommended to, spend 2-3 hours before you sleep not eating, because you don't want something heavy sitting in your stomach, messing up your sleep, making you go to the bathroom a bunch. So it's, systemically, it becomes this chronic compounding cycle of health issues, problems, things that lower your quality of life, things that negatively impact you professionally because your energy levels are poor. You're trying to focus at work the next day. You're trying to deal with your 12 hours of patience on 4 hours of poor quality sleep, and you're just chronically more miserable. You're so miserable that you end up binging at night because that was such a miserable day, having 12 hours of patience after 4 hours of sleep. So don't let that chronic compounding cycle of negative psychological and biological triggers happen to you. Get your sleep. Now, maybe somebody's watching this and say, yeah, easy for you guys to say because you guys are already healthy and whatnot. But what about me? I'm currently sleeping 4 hours at night for the last 10, 20 years. That's why I'm 270 pounds, right? And I get it. It's tough. But at the end of the day, enough is enough. And you have to start making those baby steps in the right direction. Maybe that first baby step is changing the timing of your meals during the day and the size of your meals during the day and the composition of your meals during the day, using the other tips that Dr. Mustafa and I share on our pages every single day to start making those small incremental changes. Because you're right, maybe you can't go from sleeping 4 hours to 8 hours overnight. Maybe 8 hours will never be realistic for you. I mean, for me, usually 6, 7 is good. I mean, 7 is definitely better, 8 is definitely better, but a realistic one is a good 6.5, 7, right? But you find what's realistic for you and you work up to it and you try to optimize and improve over time. So anything else you want to add on that before we go into one of the other 2 gold bars?
I was actually really, I was really happy when you mentioned obstructive sleep apnea. That was brilliant. And I get impressed when non-doctors mention that because it's often undiagnosed in the medical field. And the reason why I'm very vigilant about it, because when I do anesthesia, people have obstructive sleep apnea, they take longer to wake up. So I have to plan accordingly with the medications I get. And even when I'm doing pain procedures, if someone has sleep apnea, well, if they're going to be laying on their stomach, then they might need some extra oxygen. And so the reason why I was impressed with you saying that is because it's completely undiagnosed. But the problem is sleep apnea has so many side effects that people don't think about. And the thing is they can become serious side effects. And I'll go through the physiology for you. Number one, sleep apnea is going to increase your risk of stroke. Number two, it's going to decrease your amount of oxygen over time, which is going to increase the risk of stroke. And the reason, and it's a whole cascade of events that happen. So let's go through it. If you have sleep apnea, you're sleeping at night, okay? Your brain detects that you have less oxygen, okay? And there's actually a couple places that detect that, but your body detects that you have low oxygen. So it triggers you to breathe, okay? Then you breathe, you get your oxygen back up, and then again, you stop breathing, and then your oxygen goes down. It's a vicious cycle. So what happens over time is your kidney starts detecting that you have less oxygen in your blood. And what your kidney starts doing is it starts producing more blood because it's like, well, now I need more blood because the current blood we have doesn't have enough oxygen. And now you're like, okay, great. Now you have more blood. There's more hemoglobin. Well, there's problems with that. When your blood becomes thicker, it becomes harder for your heart to pump against it. So that's going to cause high blood pressure and it's going to thicken your heart. And thicker blood is more likely to clot. So if you have chronic depletion of oxygen in your blood, it's going to cause your blood to get thicker, and thicker blood likes to clot more. And so that's why having obstructive sleep apnea can lead to more clots and more strokes. So you have to be very careful. So if Munir is telling you, hey, you have sleep apnea, that it's absolutely brilliant that you're even telling your clients that, because most doctors won't even think that, and it's the elephant in the room half the time. Like, how are you going to have more energy if you're chronically sleep deprived and you have chronic low levels of oxygen and while you're sleeping? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So you have to fix the root cause, which is the sleep apnea. Once you fix the sleep apnea, then everything else starts falling into place. And so having a diet is going to help you fix your sleep apnea because you're starting to lose all the fat in your body. And you start losing fat here in your peripheries, and it gets closer and closer in the middle and your neck. Then eventually will go away from your bellies. And so I'm so happy that you're advising patients about sleep apnea because it's always the elephant in the room, like all the time. And even when I see patients before anesthesia, I always ask them, "Hey, do you snore at night?" "Oh, I don't know." And then the wife's like, "Mm-hmm, he sure does." And so, and so I tell them like, "Hey, after today, you need to go and get a sleep study, or you need to see someone who can help you lose weight so you can overcome your sleep apnea because once you start sleeping, you're going to feel a lot better."
Wow, subhanAllah, that's crazy. And it's so funny that so many people already been self-aware that they snore until their wife says he sure does. SubhanAllah. But yes, I learned something new, SubhanAllah, which is I didn't even realize that the kidney ends up producing more blood as a result of this, and that it leads to why these guys have such a high risk of the high blood pressure and heart disease. I thought it was just obesity, but it is obesity plus this. So that motivates me even further, where it's like, it's just crazy how as you get older, you think more about your health and just how important it is and how much health is wealth and how much the habits you have today compound till later. And it's not too late. You could be 45, you could be 55 watching this. You can be healthier at 65, 75 if you start today. If you're 25, 35 watching this, then even more. Either way, it's urgent to start. But regardless, like, Dr. Mustafa said at the beginning of this, invest in your health from a young age because the compounding returns on that, both for good or for bad, are tremendous. And it's interesting because sometimes I'll talk to brothers who are 200, and I'm really ragging on the 270-pound guy, by the way. So if you're watching this and you're 270 pounds and you don't take action after this was for you, and you still failed. No, I'm just kidding. We don't use hard motivation like that. But the point is, whether you're 230, whether you're 270, whether you're 180 pounds, but you're skinny fat, and you have visceral fat, and you have a lot of issues, and you have diabetes, even though you're only 180 pounds, or whether you're 330 pounds, and no matter who you are, I have guys who will come on and they'll be giggling about their problem. They'll be like, yeah, I got a belly, he, right? And they don't think it's serious. But after hearing this, not just from me, you listen to me all the time. Maybe you have banner blindness now. No, I'm kidding. I hope that my reminders are still harsh and hit you in the heart. But what's really hitting you in the heart is your sleep apnea, and you hear it from a doctor here first. So again, SubhanAllah, that's crazy, the chronic compounding cycle. So it's interesting because we went pretty deep into sleep, and I think sleep is actually surprisingly a good quick win a lot of people can establish. But there's also some other good quick wins that people might find easier. And I'm not saying easier as in like do this or that. Like do all three of them, right? Get your sleep, get your hydration, get your nutrition, get your everything, right? But as far as hydration goes, I guess I'd love to go into the point about like carbohydrates, hydration, all that stuff. And I'll tell you a quick story, which is the first time that I learned that carbohydrates help with hydration. I'd always known that they had something to do with water retention because I've been, training for 15 years, alhamdulillah. But the one thing I didn't know was how important it is for your hydration, because even though those two things are connected, I never made the connection in my brain until about a year or two ago. Another, jacked, mashallah, in shape, healthy Dr. Abid, I was telling you about him. I'll have to get both of you guys on a podcast one of the days. We'll do a three-way podcast. That'll be awesome. But really, really great guy, mashallah. He was giving some Ramadan tips, and he was saying, at suhoor, have a little bit of carbs. And up until that point, I'd always advocated for a low-carb suhoor because I don't want the body to be in this up and down of blood sugar during the day. So I was kind of opposed to it. I was like, somebody said something that I disagree with. How dare he? But then I said, wait a second, let me open my mind and start to learn and grow, just like how we're advising, some of the doctors who went to medical school and did a day of nutrition 20 years ago and think they know everything now, right? I need to be open-minded to learn some new things too, even if this suhoor strategy had been working for me for, 10 plus years. And so I started to add a date to my suhoor, and I noticed that it helped with the hydration and retaining a little bit of water, and I didn't get that crazy up and down in blood sugar. So, I guess there's 2 points to be had there, which are the importance of carbs for energy and the importance of carbs for hydration, and perhaps any other points you'd like to go into. So of those golden bars with, the silver tray, which one would you like to go into first, inshallah?
Yeah, I think we can talk about like good sources of carbs. And here's the thing. Let me phrase it. Let me frame this, okay? There's not one diet that works for everyone. I'm going to frame it that way. So, for instance, there's some patients that come to me they might have an autoimmune disease, or they might have extreme insulin resistance. I recommend for them to be on a ketogenic diet for some time, or on a aggressive intermittent fasting protocol for some time. And at the same time, someone else might come to me for optimization performance, like a professional athlete or even doctor, businessman, whomever, and I'll recommend a different diet. And maybe someone who is obese, they may not need the keto or intermittent fasting. So again, we go back. This is a case by case basis. This isn't a blanket statement. And this is why you should talk to someone like Munir or whomever, that they can get you on a unique plan that works for you and your schedule, because not everything I say or Munir says is going to work for you. It has to be polished and customized for you. So with that being said, I'm happy to talk about good carbs. And I want to go into that a little more because carbs get a bad rap. And I think depending on what diet you should follow, if you're choosing to have carbs, and there's certain carbs that are absolutely brilliant and you should have, like for instance, wild blueberries, cruciferous vegetables, okay, sweet potatoes. These are just excellent sources of carbs. Even red potatoes are very good after a workout because you kind of want that starch and a little bit more higher of a glycemic index. Um, there's certain carbs that I do recommend for people, but I don't recommend obviously the pancakes, the cereals, those things you absolutely have to cut out. I don't care what stage you are in your life, because if there's more than like 5 ingredients or something, you really got to think about why you're ingesting it. So when it comes to carbs, there's certain carbs that I love to have. And you can upgrade your carbs, if you will. Like if you don't want to give up bread, and for me, I don't do well with bread, honestly. But if you don't want to give up your bread and you want to have some bread, then have some sourdough bread or have some sprouted bread. If you don't want to give up your oatmeal, then have some sprouted oatmeal. Okay? There's simple switches you can make that will still not put a strain on your lifestyle. And even with that, if you're eating healthy like 80% of the time, 90% of the time, then you're invited to Ammo's house and you want to have some mensef, have the mensef. You're going to be okay as long as you're doing your 80 to 90% the rest of the time. And obviously we might have to be more aggressive with some people, but when it comes to your choices, is just as much as anyone else that a lot of the food that's out there isn't actual food. They're just food-like products. The nutrient density in that food is pretty much empty. And so when it comes to having carbs, have nutrient dense carbs. And the carbs I literally have in my fridge right now are wild blueberries, cruciferous vegetables, I have sweet potatoes. There is a bag of sprouted oatmeal. I haven't opened it. I have some sprouted bread. There's some sourdough bread. And you have to be cognizant of what you're putting in your body, whether it's a carb, protein, fat. You need to think of your body as if it's a car. This is what I tell people all the time. Would you put diesel gas in a Ferrari? Absolutely not. You want to put high octane fuel. And if you're going to be helping, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a businessman or entrepreneur, you want to be operating off of high octane fuel. You don't want to fill your Ferrari up with diesel gas.
SubhanAllah, that's such a beautiful, beautiful analogy. And, what I love about that is that you apply it to yourself, and you also apply that, mashallah, to your kids, because you're mentioning how you keep certain, healthy foods stocked in the house. And, this is another reason I'm going to go back to the science and the action points and stuff, but just another motivator, like being a good example for your kids. I think you do such a great job of that, mashallah, not just in how you look and how you carry yourself, but mashallah also in the foods that you provide. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, because that really inspired, me seeing that, especially as a new dad, to kind of really just apply that principle and not say yes to, chocolates and all these unhealthy things that maybe, my kid with his fast metabolism can get away with, but really just building those good habits from a young age as best I can, inshallah. So it's another reason as a doctor is to be a better role model to your kids and pass down good habits, especially if they have your genetics and you have a genetic propensity to diabetes and heart disease and stuff like that. It's important to pass that down. Now, there's a couple other really beautiful points that you opened up there that we probably won't have time to go through we definitely won't have time to go in today's podcast, because there's some in-depth points, such as the effectiveness of the ketogenic diet for people with autoimmune disorders. This is a very non-talked about point, right? Let's say somebody has an autoimmune disease. There's so many we can list. MS, lupus, whatever it might be. There are so many different ones that we can talk about there. So maybe that's another video we could do at another time. You mentioned different carb sources and food ranking protocols. I actually have a video on that, so I can link that as well, and I'll also link Dr. Mustafa's profile. I think YouTube lets me link it up here, but if not, I'll link it down below regardless. But a lot of great points to go into. SubhanAllah, the science of food quality and everything else, it goes really deep, and there's only so much time we have in one episode. But I want to kind of start wrapping things up because I don't want to make this too long. Mashallah, the people who are watching right now, they have a solid attention span. We just crossed the 1 hour mark, but I want to make sure that inshallah we keep these short and sharp. But I definitely love to do more of these episodes, and in the comments, let me know what topics would you guys like me to cover in future episodes. And then Dr. Mustafa, were there any points that you either wanted to briefly touch on or even go deeper into? I've got time, but I just want to maybe start wrapping things up. But were there any points that they're open loops? We could either direct them to another video, which I'm definitely going to do for some of the points, especially if there's comments about any videos we've already done. But are there any points that you really want to make sure we still cover today, inshallah?
I think we did a good job of just giving an overall view of our beliefs and our value systems, because this needs to be integrated in medicine. And I love that you're helping these doctors and entrepreneurs, and because this is the missing aspect in medicine, and this is why I practice the same thing. It's because if we're not taking care of the root cause, which is obesity, insulin resistance, hypertension, if we are not trying to reverse the root causes, then we're just going to be in this vicious cycle where we're just putting band-aids on everyone. And we have to take care of the root causes. And you start by eliminating things that are surrounding you and replacing them with things that are good for you. And you can keep it as simple as that. And then when it comes to eating, do your best to eat 80 to 90% healthy most of the time. And then if you're out and you don't want to offend anyone, sure, you could dabble a little bit. But I guarantee you, over time, you're going to want to do that less and less because you're going to feel so good with your healthy habits. And I want to stop it there. I think we can totally expand off this during another podcast. If you guys have any questions, drop a comment. We're happy to expand on this and do multiple podcasts to get you guys feeling right, inshallah.
Absolutely, inshallah. And the next podcast we actually already have planned. We're going to be doing it on Dr. Mustafa's page, so make sure you follow him. I'm going to attach all of his links below. Make sure you subscribe to him on YouTube specifically and Instagram. Don't be shy on any of the platforms. Hit him up on all of them. But stay tuned on his YouTube as well, because we're going to be doing an episode on social media for doctors, speaking to entrepreneurs and speaking to doctors. Really, really important points, inshallah. And then we'll also do them on whatever nutritional topics, fitness topics, anything else you want us to cover in the comments below. But either way, I'll link the food qualities video up here that I did before. I'll link any other relevant ones below. I'll link Dr. Mustafa's page here, or at least here, but hopefully they let me do it here too. And inshallah, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum.